Hey humans, how's it going? Susan Ruth here. Thanks for listening to another episode of Hey Human Podcast. This is episode 292, and I had a conversation with Ken Levine. He is a busy guy, Emmy Award winning, many times Emmy Award nominated, Writers Guild of America Award winning, also nominated for a lot. He has written for some of the most beloved television shows that have ever existed, including MASH, Cheers, Fraiser, The Simpsons, Wings, Everybody Loves Raymond, Becker, Dharma and Greg, and with his writing partner David Isaacs, he created the series Almost Perfect. He was a co-writer of feature films Volunteers, Mannequin 2. He was also a Major League Baseball announcer and also a disc jockey. He's got a podcast called Hollywood and Levine. He has a blog as well. I mean, he does so many things. Playwright, tons of plays, which, by the way, you can teach them or perform them. They're online, available at kenlevineplays.com. And, of course, on the links page, I have all that stuff. But anyway, really interesting guy, funny guy. I was obsessed with MASH and Cheers and Fraiser growing up. So I was really excited to talk to Ken. During the pandemic, I rewatched every episode of Cheers. And I think I might go find all of the MASH episodes, actually, because that would be a fun memory lane. I remember loving Dharma and Greg as well. So, so wild. I've said it before and I'll say it again. It's surreal for me on this show that I get to speak with now people whom I grew up admiring or loving their work, their bodies of work, without really understanding who did it. You know, when you're young and you get into something, the person that did it isn't maybe as necessarily as interesting to you as just the thing itself. And then as an adult, you want to know, oh, who created that? Who was the artist or the writer or the creator behind the thing? So looking past the curtain, if you will. Anyway, it was really a cool conversation. I had a good time. we kind of went all over the map, but I really enjoyed it. I think I'm going to take 2 weeks off. So for those of you who have been with this show forever, it's almost 6 years old now, and I've never taken a day off. There has been a show every week since its inception, and I was thinking about it today, and I mentioned it to my best friend Ellen, and she said, you know what, you should. It's okay. Take a couple weeks and just enjoy the rest of December. So we're going to come back, unless I get a wild hair and just say, you know what, I'm going to put out an episode anyway. But for right now, I'm thinking, nope, I'm going to come back on the 6th of January with a brand new episode. I've got some really incredible shows coming up, some wild conversations that I can't wait for you to hear. So yeah, definitely that. But in the meantime, if you're new to the show or maybe came in a couple years ago or whatever, like I said, it's been going on for a long time. And I just wanted to mention a couple past episodes. Out of, 292, there's a lot to go through. But episode 51 with Katie Troyer, she's an Amish little person. I loved that episode. Episode 25 with Brock Hayhoe, who most of you would know as Brooklyn Heights. And that was a great conversation. Drag queen extraordinaire, and also on RuPaul's Drag Race. Holly Dexter, episode 166. Oh my gosh, her story is nuts, and it's edge of the seat listening for sure. It's hard to believe one person can go through so many things. And she's an author of several books, including Fire Season. Episode 103, Benjamin, also known as Griffin. He's a gay porn star. That was a fascinating episode. And then episode 218, Gary Donzig. I enjoyed that conversation so much, the philosophy of it. He was diagnosed with cancer and then said, hey, I think y'all diagnosed me wrong, and then did his own deep dive and figured out that they had misdiagnosed and he actually had a different cancer than they thought he had. Really fascinating conversation. We talk about religion and philosophy and all that stuff. And, just go through, check out some of the older episodes. There's really some doozies on there, and then I won't feel guilty for not having a new show come out in the next 2 weeks. I feel real guilt about that, I gotta tell you. Anyway, usual stuff. Hey Human Podcast social media is on Facebook and Instagram. You can find my personal social media, Susan Ruthism, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. You can email me, susan@heyhumanpodcast.com. If you're into music, go find my music on Spotify or Amazon Music or iTunes under Susan Ruth. You can go to susanruth.com and sign up for the mailing list and check out all the other things I do besides the podcast, art and music and acting things and all that stuff. I mentioned earlier the links page. The links page is fat with ideas and thoughts and things and books and articles and all sorts of stuff. Every episode has its own links section on the links page. I do the deep dive so you don't have to. And so definitely go check that out too. If you feel like contributing to this ad-free podcast, go to the contribute page there on heyhumanpodcast.com. And it really helps the show and I appreciate it. Rate and review Hey Human on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. And I think that's about it. Oh, I got my booster today. Very exciting. My arm hurts, but otherwise I feel fine. And got the Moderna and excited about that. So that's what I got. I hope you have very happy holidays, whatever you decide to do or not do for that matter. And if you can hear my voice, know that you are loved and appreciated and, stay well and be safe out there. Be kind to each other. And thanks for listening. I really appreciate it. Okay, here we go. Ken Levine, welcome to Hey Human.
Hey, thank you very much for having me.
Absolutely. And thank you. Shout out to Russ Woody, who got us connected. Russ is my new booking agent.
Very funny man.
He is. He's hysterical. He adores you, and I learned about you.
I don't know why.
I learned about you so very long. I met Russ about 2 years ago, I guess now, and I have heard about you so much that he really, really does. He thinks you're the cat's meow, as they say.
Well, he's funnier than me, and he prints better. So.
The first thing I noticed when doing some research about you is you're incredibly prolific. You're a nonstop go between books and plays and the television writing, the blog. You've been I'm telling you your life, but you've been a radio announcer. You've been a DJ. You've worn a lot of hats. You wear a lot of hats.
I'm terrible in sports. Okay. So it's like, I don't golf. I don't play tennis. It's kind of what I do to stay active. And I'm a firm believer that you make your own momentum. And so things happen because you're working on other things. And sometimes they lead to unexpected things. In my blog, I did a number of posts about Neil Simon and how much I admired Neil Simon. And I got a call from Turner Classic Movies. This was a few years ago. And they said, we're going to do a Friday night spotlight on Neil Simon movies. Would you host it? So we know you've had some radio and TV background. And I said, yeah, sure. So they flew me back to Atlanta and I hosted this whole series on Turner Classic Movies. And you go like, when would I ever host movies on Turner Classics? But, it stemmed from the blog. So you never know where these things might lead.
And the idea that you come to every situation mostly prepared for when the opportunity arises.
Yeah,
right?
Hopefully. The other thing I find is by working on different projects, it kind of keeps you young and you're always trying to reinvent yourself. So you're always trying to really learn, okay, how do I become the best possible director? How do I become the best possible playwright? I don't necessarily get there, but it's good. It's like it's a good challenge, and it keeps you young in a way, because you're always learning and you're always trying to develop new skills.
Did you grow up in
my age, 40, you have to start thinking about things like that.
Yes, it's important to develop strong skills at 40. I agree.
Mm-hmm.
Everything before that.
All right, 45, you got me.
Everything before that's a wash. Did you grow up in a creative family? Did you have a lot of support in that realm?
I did have mostly support in my family. I think, and this may just be me projecting on them, but they thought I was a little weird. What 8-year-old wants to be a baseball announcer, not player? And I would sit in my room and draw cartoons and listen to music and want to be a disc jockey and that type of thing. And I was really into radio, and I would collect tapes of different disc jockeys around the country, and nerd stuff, like serious nerd stuff. But back in those days, nerd stuff was not fashionable.
Right.
It was a little weird, but they were supportive. They never said, throw those tapes away. You need to be a doctor. So they never did that. And I grew up in a very loving family. So for the most part, yes, they were supportive and tolerant.
Are you the youngest child?
No, I have a younger brother, and he was the kind. He played high school football. How many Jews play high school football? So he
only Brendan Fraiser. I saw that movie.
He was the regular kid playing Little League and doing all that stuff. And like I said, I would sit in the stands and do play-by-play to myself.
Sandy Koufax. I was trying to think of another. Isn't he Jewish?
Yeah. No, there's some Jewish ball players.
Yeah.
Hank Greenberg and Gabe Kapler, who's now the manager of the Giants. Kevin Youkilis. There are a number of Jews in baseball. Not a large number, but nonetheless. There's
your next book, Jews in Baseball, a memoir.
It's a very small book.
What'd you study in college? What was your major?
Psychology, which helped. I went to UCLA, and the psychology allows me to write Fraiser and Lilith's psychobabble.
Yes.
But, I got into college and I wanted to be in radio and television. And my father said, if you get a job, you're going to learn all of that. You're at a university, take advantage of it and take an academic course load. Take classes that you wouldn't otherwise take. So I thought, well, I'm interested in people. So I became a psychology major. And 2 years into the program, I still thought, I'd kind of like to be a television major. And I went to the TV department and I said, how do I apply? They said, well, you fill out this form and you give us a tape of something that you've done. And I thought, wait, aren't you supposed to teach me how to do a tape? What do I need you if I already have a tape and know how to do it? So I did not make a tape. I took a couple of TV classes at UCLA, but I stayed in psychology. I got my degree in psychology.
I think it has likely served you well, considering the types of shows you've written for. MASH, I think of MASH. To me, that show, aside from the obvious of the Korean War and what was going on with that, the show lasted longer than the conflict.
Yeah, like 3.5 times. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. The deep dives of the human psyche. I mean, even in the finale, of course, when Hawkeye loses his shit. But you wrote one of the ones that I noticed you wrote was the one from the perspective of the soldier who goes through the MASH unit.
Right. Point of view.
Did you win an Emmy for that one, right?
No, we were nominated for an Emmy. Yeah, okay. We lost. What really pissed me off is that our director, Charles Dubin, was nominated and lost. And that was really a crime, because he did an amazing job. For your listeners who are not familiar with the episode, it was all seen through the eyes of a patient. And you start out and he's on the front line and he gets injured, and you see him in the helicopter landing at MASH, and then being taken to OR and post-op and everything else. And you see the camp through his eyes. But those were before the days of steady cams and small cameras. So he had this giant bulky camera that he had to strap onto things and put in weird places. And he only had a certain amount of time to do it. And it was a phenomenal job. And you know, I was pissed, obviously, that we lost the Emmy, but I was really pissed that he did, because no one deserved an Emmy more than Charles Dubin for that episode.
Yeah, it's really something, and ahead of its time, really, I think, too.
Well, we wanted to find ways of shaking up the format. And this had been established a couple of years before us, an episode Larry Gelbart and Gene Reynolds conceived called The Interview, which basically you were watching a half-hour television interview, a documentary, and it was all in black and white, and there was a journalist who was interviewing them, that type of thing. And so we wanted to find a way of shaking up the format. And I came up with this idea, and I went to our executive producer at the time, Burt Metcalf, and I said, this is either going to be the best or worst episode of the year. It's either going to really work or it's just going to be awful. But at the time, we were on Monday nights, and the Oscars were on Monday nights. Mm. So once a year, we knew we were up against the Oscars. So we always knew, okay, we have one bad show that we can do, and we'll just save it as our Oscar show, because we know we're going to get killed that night and no one will see it. So we said, look, worst comes to worst, it'll be our Oscar show. But it came out great, and it aired actually in sweeps in November. We didn't have to hold it back. We found another show.
Yeah, that was a great episode. You, as a writer, must have been thrilled to have actors who were so stunningly great at that.
Absolutely. And, you know, they're doing something in that episode that they never, ever do. And that is look directly into the camera.
Yeah, breaking fourth wall. It's meta breaking fourth wall, but it's still breaking fourth wall.
Well, not only that, but, you know, actors really work off of other actors and being able to relate to other actors. So even if there's like a close-up of Hawkeye and he's talking to Potter, well, if it's the close-up of Alan, Harry is standing right by the camera and he's feeding him lines so that they can have this connection. Well, now the actors have to stare into a camera lens and pretend that that's a flesh and blood person. That was very difficult. We were very fortunate when we came up with the idea. We had heard that there was a movie done like in the 40s, I think, called Lady in the Lake, with Robert Montgomery, and it was a Philip Marlowe noir type movie, but it was all done point of view. So we got a copy of the movie and we screened it, And what we found was when the other actors were talking to him, they were fine. But when he was talking to the other actors, now you're just watching somebody staring into a camera awkwardly. It was just really weird. So we got the idea, okay, let's give our patient a throat injury so he can't talk. So all of the talking is coming from our people. And finally, when he says a couple of words at the very end, that they have a real impact. But we never would have come across that had we not seen that movie. We learned from Robert Montgomery's mistakes.
There's a lot in the years that you were on that show that you were able to dig out, especially the psychology of humanity, or lack thereof. And did you have moments in the writers' rooms and things where you thought, oh, I don't know if the world is ready for this yet? Because, I mean, the show is what, how old is it now? 40 years old? No, it's Cheers is 40 years old. It's old.
Yeah, no, it's 112. It's like 50 years old, which is kind of amazing considering I'm 45.
Yeah, it's just right. Well, yeah. Time machines, good time machine.
Well, I will say that a lot of the stuff we got was from research, where we would interview doctors and corpsmen and nurses and patients and people who served in Korea. And we had tons and tons of this information, which we would turn into stories. And one of the stories that we came across was the story where a mother had to kill her baby to keep it quiet so that the people in her village was not discovered. And Alan wanted to do that story. This was year 7. And David and I said, no, it crosses a line. We don't want to do that story. By the time they did the last episode, we had left. And I guess he always wanted to do the story. I still hate the story. And I still think it was a mistake to do that story.
It was an intense moment when he realizes he's with Sydney and he realizes, the chicken was not a chicken.
Right.
Let that be a lesson to you. The chicken is seldom the chicken.
That's why we listen to podcasts.
That's right. That's your next memoir. The chicken is never the chicken. Let's segue into Cheers. That was an incredible show. So, during the quarantine, I rewatched every episode.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. Fantastic. What a ride that show was.
It was great. And my partner and I were on it for 9 of the 11 years. And we wrote 40 episodes. We wrote more episodes than anybody.
Wow.
It's a record that will never be broken since they're not making any more Cheers.
Well, what's interesting too, I was thinking about this morning, the shows that you were a part of, I don't know that they make shows like that really anymore anyway. And maybe on the streaming, there's stuff that's intense or whatever, but there's the charm and the depth and the humanity that was covered in these shows is really something.
Well, I think, look, times change and sensibilities change, but you're right. I think that there was a humanity that was at the core of all of the shows that we wrote. And what I see now is shows that are a lot more mean-spirited. You're laughing or you're amused by horrible people doing horrible things. And, shows like White Lotus, 9 Perfect Strangers or whatever. And like I said, it's just, society changes and sensibilities change, but I sort of miss it. There are shows I watch now that I like a lot. I really like Ted Lasso. I really liked Hacks. But they're not funny. They're not really funny. They don't really make me laugh. And I always had the feeling with Cheers and with Fraiser that there was kind of a contract with the audience that even if this is not one of our best episodes, you will laugh out loud 5 times. Okay, there will be 5 great jokes that you will laugh out loud at. And then most of the episodes will be good and you'll really be involved in the story and there'll be way more than 5 laughs or whatever. But at least there was sort of the understanding that if you watch this show, at least you're going to laugh.
Yeah.
And I don't see that today with shows. Shows that are comedies might have a couple of amusing wry lines, that type of thing. But, it's not like, when you watched Seinfeld, you watch Seinfeld to laugh, and I think Friends is a great show, and I think will probably be around for 50 more years because I think each new generation will find it. Friends is very funny.
Yeah.
Friends is very funny. And I just don't see that in shows today. And I want to laugh. Please, somebody do a show that's really funny again.
What about you?
Well, like I said, I'm 45 and the TV industry only wants writers who are 44 and younger.
Yeah.
So,
which is a real shame.
I'm writing plays.
Yeah.
And that's been very gratifying to have a play and have an audience laugh for 90 minutes and hold their attention. I'm not being seen by 30 million people anymore, but it's very satisfying to be in an audience and actually hear the stuff get laughs. So yeah, I'm still around and I'm still, writing.
Knowing that there's an audience now that has a different mentality that does come to the table with these different ideas of what's funny even, or whether or not they even want to laugh. How do you win them over? Do you think about that, about pulling them in without them realizing it, so that then when they do get the laugh, they're like, oh gosh, here's a feeling I'm not used to and I like it. And now I'm in for the whole ride.
I think that comes from creating characters and situations that get the audience to care. Okay, because I want my viewer or audience member, whoever it might be, to be invested in the characters and what they're going through. And if they care, then you can make them laugh. But to me, that's the important thing, is finding characters that you like. And that's where today, like I say, things are a little bit different, because today you can start with a horrible, unlikable character doing terrible things, and that seems to work. And I'm not saying that all characters have to be nice and lovely. I mean, some of the best characters are the ones who are villains or horrible. you get comedy out of flaws. So,
well, Cheers was a cast of narcissist characters, right?
Exactly.
They all were horrible.
And if you have people who are, vain, or overly competitive, or basically have a disconnect with who they are and, how the world sees them, you're going to get a lot more comedy than you can out of Father Mulcahy, who's basically just this really nice guy. And you're right. In Cheers, there was certainly a certain amount of conflict and culture clash, that type of thing. And you were able to get you get a lot of conflict. But again, the core of Cheers was that they were essentially a family, that it's someplace that you could go to feel like you belong. And it's someplace that, even though Carla was taking shots at you, it's like, your sister taking shots at you. You weren't horribly offended and that type of thing. So there still was this, feeling of camaraderie. It's interesting, the perception and, how people see a show. Maybe year 7 or 8 or 9, there was like a subplot going throughout the season of Sam trying to get Rebecca into bed. And along the way, he did some just like awful things. In the Me Too era, he'd probably be in jail for some of the things he tried to pull. And we took research. NBC did research on the show that year. Everybody loved Sam because they saw Sam as a father figure to everyone in the bar. And we're going, what show are you watching?
Maybe Lecherous Uncle.
What show are you watching? Because this guy was doing everything short of stalking. This guy was doing everything short of exposing himself, and the audience like, Sam's our father figure.
Yeah, I mean, they had years falling in love with everyone on that show. Could you tell us somewhere along at what point do you see the characters and know that something like Fraiser's character is then going to be able to stand on its own and be its own show?
Well, interestingly, with Kelsey was only supposed to be in like 3 episodes. He was introduced as like a current boyfriend for Diane at the beginning of season 3. And we saw like early on, just like that first and second week, we said, this guy has got a real presence and adds a real interesting dynamic. Let's not get rid of him. And so Fraiser wound up a regular at the bar. And you look for characters that you feel have enough gravitas that they can carry their own show. And it's tough when you have supporting characters because some can and some can't. Some are basically just really good supporting characters, second bananas. And like another example is Matt LeBlanc, when they spun him off from Friends. Matt LeBlanc couldn't carry a show by himself.
Although I did love the show he was on with the English.
Episodes, but it wasn't. He wasn't the star. It wasn't the character from Friends.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. Yeah. He was playing a different thing.
Yeah.
So Fraiser had enough of that gravitas, and it was a character who has a drive and was very funny. And you figure this guy could carry a show. NBC for years kept coming after us to do a spinoff of Norm and Cliff. And we just like, no, one is this complete idiot and the other has no wants. The other is just content to just sit at a bar all day. How do you build a show around these two people?
Yeah.
So we didn't.
Yeah. And then Fraiser ended up with such an incredible cast as well, supporting cast.
Yeah.
Even the dog had charisma.
That was a very good dog and had a wonderful trainer. She was so loving with that dog. Yeah. We'd ask her, we'd say, Ken, Moose was the dog's real name. Can Moose grab this ball of yarn and take it there? And she says, yeah, you could do that. Can Moose make dinner? No. Moose can't cook. Okay.
Can you do a martini straight up? That's what we need. Let's talk about your writing partner, David Isaac. So when did you two meet? How did that come to be?
We met in 1973 when we were both in the same Army Reserve unit. I was 2.5 years old at the time. And David was reading a book on George S. Kaufman, playwright, who is one of my idols. First of all, just to see a soldier reading a book is rather unusual. At the time, I was a top 40 disc jockey, and David was working at ABC in Hollywood in a long since obsolete department called film shipping, where they would literally ship copies of shows to outposts that had trouble getting the satellite. So we were talking, we both kind of had this desire to write. And at the time I was working in San Bernardino as a disc jockey, and we were in the Army Reserves, and you have to go to summer camp, active duty 2 weeks every year. So when our 2 weeks were up, I went back to San Bernardino, quickly got fired, moved back to my parents' house in the marina while I sent out tapes trying to get another job where they could fire me. And I called David and said, hey, you want to talk about maybe writing something together? And we got together and decided, okay, let's be a partnership. Neither one of us had written anything. Neither one of us knew anything about it. We thought, all right, well, let's write a pilot about two people in college, because that was our total life experience. When you're 2.5 years old, you don't have much life experience.
Although impressive, you were in college at 2.5.
I was in college at 1.
Yeah, so, clearly a genius.
So I went to a bookstore in Hollywood that had scripts on a remainder table. The way most bookstores used to have remainder tables with books for $1, and they had TV scripts. And I bought an Odd Couple TV script, and that's the format. Like, oh, wow, you interior Madison apartment day, and they double space this, and this is what the format looks like. We didn't even know that. So we wrote a pilot. I think it would have cost $100 million in 1973 to produce. We had all kinds of big explosions and stuff. Needless to say, it didn't get made, but we had a good time writing it. And through a friend, I met a writer who was on The Odd Couple. And I asked him, how do you break in? He said, you have to have a script from an existing show. So David and I really admired the Mary Tyler Moore Show. And to learn how to write the Mary Tyler Moore Show, we would go to his apartment every Saturday night, because it was on CBS Saturday night at 9:00. This was before VCRs. So we would watch the show live, and we would hold up a microphone to the speaker, and we would do an audio recording of it. Then we would go back and write an outline based on the show. And we did that week after week after week until we started seeing patterns. We started figuring out, oh, they do 2 stories. And usually the second story is this. And Mary is always involved in the A story and peripherally in the B story. And this is how many scenes they do usually in the first act and how many scenes they do in the second act. And if they're not in her apartment or in WJM, there's usually only one other set. Okay, they'll go to a bar or they'll go to Lou's house or something like that. There's only one of those. So, we can't have them going to 4 different places. And so we figured all of this out, and we wrote, our next script was the Mary Tyler Moore Show. And it got rejected by Mary Tyler Moore, and we also wrote a Rhoda, but the story editor of the Jeffersons read our Mary Tyler Moore Show, and he really liked it and invited us to come in pitch the Jeffersons. And we did, and they liked one of our ideas and bought it. And that's how we got a Jeffersons assignment, and that's how we broke in.
Wow. That must feel like a lifetime ago and just yesterday all at the same time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. It was 1975.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that too was the kind of show that broke so many boundaries and really woke people up, I'd like to think.
Yeah. And we were on it very early on. It started as a mid-season replacement and then got picked up for a full season. And we wrote during its first full season. So we did that. Then we bounced around. We did episodes of Joe and Sons, a show that was on CBS for like 11 minutes. We did some stories for Barney Miller, and then we got MASH, and that really was the launch pad to our career. We got a MASH assignment, and we did a very good job on that script. And that script became like a golden ticket for us. MASH kept giving us more scripts to write. Our agent would send that off to other shows, and we got an episode of the Tony Randall Show, which was at MTM, which at the time was like Camelot. They had Mary Tyler Moore Show, Bob Newhart Show, Tony Randall Show, Rhoda, Phyllis. That was, like I said, Camelot. And so we wrote, for that show, we wrote an episode, and they liked it well enough to put us on staff. So we were on staff of the Tony Randall Show. And then the next year we were offered staff on MASH. And due to, fortunate circumstances where the people above us left in the middle of the season, and David and I are literally we're 26 years old and we're the head writers of MASH.
That's bonkers.
Yeah. Insane. Back in a day when there was no network interference, there was the showrunner, our executive producer, Burt Metcalf, but he wasn't a writer. And, he handled the directing and casting and editing and post-production and all that stuff. We just focused on the writing. And we, we didn't do that badly a job. They're still running those shows.
Yeah, yes, they
even
are.
without all the interference.
Along the way, especially in that era, and these are shows that are male centric, obviously in MASH, you had hot lips and then the occasional hot nurse that would come along and things. But did you make a conscious effort of trying to tell stories that also empowered women? Because even the industry itself was very male dominant. Did you get it pushed back from that? Because there were a few episodes of MASH I remember where I was like, wow, Hot Lips, she's such a strong, powerful woman. She's got this reserved wall that she breaks through once in a while. At first, she was sort of more of a foil, and then...
with Hot Lips, we really saw an opportunity because at that time, there really weren't that many strong women on television. And you figure, look, a woman who basically volunteers and joins the army and is on the front lines and in a MASH unit, it certainly makes sense and is certainly very organic that she would be a strong woman, even in 1952. So we really leaned into that. And Loretta is like such a good actress that you could pretty much play all kinds of emotions with her. And the problem with a strong character, a strong woman character, certainly is that, well, she's going to come off too strident and the audience is not going to like her. But she was, again, such a good actress and gave such depth to that character that you saw the vulnerability underneath, and there were times when there were cracks in the armor, and she was willing to cry and willing to be vulnerable. So we basically could go as far as we wanted to with her because we had such a good actress that we knew could pull it off.
Mm-hmm. She's a phenomenal actress. That show is just, for those of you listening, if you haven't watched MASH, even though it was from so long ago, it's an extraordinary television program. Really, truly extraordinary. And the movie is fun too, but that's a whole other ball of wax. It's sort of a National Lampoon's version of the show. Who produced that? The original, was that?
It was 20th Century Fox, and Ring Lardner Jr. wrote it. It's from a novel, and Robert Altman directed it.
Altman, that's right.
And Robert Altman pretty much had this vision of doing this very subversive movie in a very unique style at the time, which was very conversational and people talking over each other, and it was pretty groundbreaking for its time. And the interesting thing to me about the movie, one of the best things to come out of that movie was the theme song, the iconic theme song.
Mm-hmm.
And the music was written by Johnny Mandel. And Altman wanted lyrics, but he wanted the lyrics to be basically crass and stupid. So he had his 15-year-old son write the lyrics. Okay. Well, if you write the lyrics to the song, then you're one of the songwriters. And in terms of royalties and that type of thing, we have never on MASH ever used the lyrics, ever. But Altman's son still gets a royalty. And Altman's son has probably made 15 $20 million over the last 50 years. His son has made 12,000 times the amount that his father made on the movie.
Yeah, I sang that song in my 7th grade talent show, so I probably
How'd you do? Did you win?
I think it wasn't a win kind of situation. It was a showcasey kind of situation. But in retrospect, it's a pretty dark song to be singing to 7th graders. And I probably owe him
on American Idol. Did you?
Yeah, right. I probably owe him a royalty check somewhere along the way too.
Simon Cowell gave you thumbs up.
God.
Good.
Oh man. Of your babies that you've created, or your character, all these things that you've done, is there still something that you wish you could go back and tweak or rewrite a little bit, or something you would change in these characters?
I would, not so much the characters, but I would go back. MASH. I would like one day more on each script that I think, I watch them and I go, I could do that artfully. I could do that a little better. There's a funnier joke here, that type of thing. I would say for most of the episodes of MASH, I would like to go back. Ironically, not so with Cheers. Not so with Cheers. Cheers, it's like, okay, done, out there, go. So, but MASH, MASH was such a unique show, and I was only 2.5. But looking back, there are things that bother me. Now, I'm sure they don't bother the viewers.
Right.
But little things that bother me where I just think, okay, if I had that outline and David and I were writing that script today, it would be 10% better.
Is there an episode in any of these shows that you've done that you had to really fight for, where you got pushback?
2. Point of View. It took 2 seasons to talk Bert into letting us do that. And on Cheers, the first season, we did a show called Boys in the Bar, where Sam's roommate, when he was playing for the Red Sox, wrote a book and came out as gay. And for Sam to support him, there was concern that the bar was going to become a gay bar. And that was a pretty risky show. And it was our first season. That was a pretty risky show. And I'm very proud of that. Interestingly, again, times change. And, we've gotten pushback recently from the LGBT community that it's insensitive and they should pull it. And the fact of the matter is, when that show aired, we won the Writers Guild Award for it. We were nominated for an Emmy, and we won the GLAAD Award by the gay community. So the gay community at the time thought it was the best script.
That is the problem with trying to police eras, because firstly, it robs us of seeing the progress and where things were versus where things are.
Mm-hmm.
And how do you hold something from 30 years ago up against right now? It's ridiculous.
Right. And it's like, what, they should have known better 50 years ago.
Right.
That was, that was society. Societies change and evolve. And behavior that was acceptable. 1960, look at Mad Men,
right.
and the way that women were treated. it was terrible. But if you're showing 1960s advertising agencies, that was the culture. That was the dynamic.
Yeah.
And to do it otherwise, I mean, MASH, to be honest, I think we kind of blurred the lines as the series evolved. I think they got a lot more sensitive by the end of the series than the culture was. You know, the show began reflecting Alan and his sensibility, which was...
Alan was the first woke human.
Kind of, yeah. Kind of.
For sure.
So it kind of blurred that. I mean, look, the hairstyles, you know, by the end, no one had longer hair.
Well, it's interesting.
Loretta was wearing these like MASH custom T-shirts and things like there was no such thing.
Yeah. I owned one of those T-shirts, by the way, when I was in junior high. I mean, I was a cool kid.
I had a MASH T-shirt that they made for everyone in the crew, saying something like MASH, the happiest crew on television, whatever. And I wore that shirt for a while, and my daughter now still wears that shirt.
Absolutely. Yeah, just steal your when I went to college, I stole my father's Levi's. I still have them. So I get that bond between daughter and father's clothing. When did you decide to start a podcast, Hollywood and Levine?
I started about 5 years ago. I've been in broadcasting pretty much my whole life. I was a disc jockey, talk show host, Major League Baseball announcer. So I have done a lot of radio, and I always wanted to do a podcast, but I am technically challenged, so to speak. And this company came to me and said, you do the podcast and we'll put it up and we'll do all of that, and we'll look for advertising and split the advertising with you. So I said, okay, let's do it. And they even offered to do the editing for me. But again, my radio background, I'm used to production and editing, and, you know, I can do all of that myself. So I started it, like I said, about 5 years ago. And I would say maybe 50, 60% of the time it's interviews with people that are interesting. I try to get some different people that you don't ordinarily get on podcasts, writers who you may have heard their names for years, but you don't know who they are. Jim Burrows, I got, famous director. I've gotten women directors from my sports background. I've got Al Michaels and Joe Buck each did my podcast. I've had a number of actors, George Wendt and Perry Gilpin and Nancy Travis and Ann Gillian. I've had singers and stand-up comedians and warm-up guys and casting directors and network executives and, as many different people that I can find who are interesting. And then the other time I just tell war stories, crap like I'm telling you. So I'm like at about episode 245 or so, but I enjoy it, and it is built a following. I have sponsors from time to time. So it's like, well, okay.
That's awesome.
Somebody must be listening.
It's a lot of work having a podcast.
It is. It is. People go, oh, no, it'd be fun. I could just do my own podcast. It's easy. All you got to do, you got a microphone and you're up and running and you got a podcast. Like, well, no. If you want a good podcast, it takes a lot of time and effort and thought and post-production. One of the podcasts that I did, the one I'm probably most proudest of, the 5 years, I, along with another friend, we're in an improv workshop together. And we did a simulated bad podcast, doing all of the things that are annoying in podcasts. And we had leaf blowers and things not edited out. And it's really a very funny episode. And I've had like a couple of teachers who teach podcasting. Actually, they teach podcasting now. But they use that episode as
that's hilarious. I love that.
What not to do. It's called The World's Worst Podcast, I think.
I'm not going to deny it. I've had
earlier
a few
this year. Yeah, it's earlier this year. And the person I did it with, Aoife Carty, was very funny. And we just riffed. You get two co-hosts and they sit there and they just bullshit for 15 minutes. And like, no one is interested in this. This is just nonsense. And they'll have a topic for their blog, but they never get to it. Or they'll do, trivia questions and never get the answer. Go off on horrible tangents. Speaking
of blogs,
what?
Did your blog beget your podcast or the other way around?
Well, I've had my blog for almost 16 years.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Since you were 4.
Since I was a zygote.
Yeah.
I was in the womb. I did my first podcast.
That's right. I read online that you got into some sort of a battle with Roseanne in your blog, and I thought, oh wow, he's so modern.
Yeah. There was an article in New York Magazine, supposedly written by Roseanne, although it was too well written. Somebody had to clean it up. And she's talking about, she didn't get the credit for her show, and Matt Williams, who did get credit, did nothing. And people asked me about it. And I said, well, first of all, the name of the show is Roseanne. So how is she complaining that she's not getting credit for the show? It's named Roseanne. And I talked about how it takes a certain skill to just turn a stand-up act into an actual dynamic for a television series. And that Matt Williams did a lot and deserved the credit. And I also talked about how reprehensible a person she was to her writers. And this comes from firsthand knowledge from many of her writers. She didn't even want to know their names. They would have to come down to the stage with numbers. They had like numbers attached to them. Mm. Okay. That's how dehumanizing she was. So I wrote this article. And she had a blog at the time, and somebody alerted her to the thing. And she just like tore into me. This is, ass hat and this horrible hack and blah, blah, blah. And I didn't want to get into, a debate with this woman, but she said how, I was probably horrible to women writers. And I worked with like a number of women writers. We had women writers on all of our shows. we did a show called Almost Perfect with Nancy Travis. That was on CBS for 2 years. One of our co-creators was a woman, and I would say 60% of our staff were women. So the women who we had hired on the staff, like, all emailed me like their rebuttal. So I put that on, where they were saying, I had just had a baby and Ken let me go home early, so that I could nurse the baby. And, Ken was like a mentor and blah, 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 and everything. And then that pissed her off, and that got like another rant. And the LA Times picked up on it. And so it kind of went viral, and I was like, meh, she's insane. She's insane. It's like, I didn't want to get into it for, more than 2 or 3 blog posts, because why?
Yeah.
She is who she is, and so she had, the people that follow her were like, yeah, he's an asshole. It's like,
the blind leading the ignorant, leading the
right.
Yeah. The bloated.
So that was my feud with Roseanne.
Ah, okay. I thought that was, sometimes I think, some of that stuff has got to be, I know in the modern times, feuds get made by PR people in order to keep people in the forefront. But then Roseanne has a kind of this history, she has a history of stirring up some dust. So right. I thought that was interesting.
And again, I only wrote this piece because this article had come out, which was pure fiction. And a number of my readers asked me to comment
on
it, which happens a lot. I get a lot of my posts from people saying, what do you think about Hacks? What do you think about Ted Lasso? What do you think about this? What do you think about this trend or that,
I love Hacks. That's a great show. And who doesn't? If you don't love Ted Lasso, you're a joy stealer. I will say that over and over and over again. But even that show had to throw in some darkness. It was interesting when they did that for the second half of or the first half of this second season. I thought, wow, they really. I know that people are complicated and people aren't always happy, and clearly it was obvious in the beginning of that show that the veneer was purposeful. I knew that it was heading in that direction, but.
Right.
You can't really make a show that's just believe all the time.
Right.
Yeah. It's dark days upon us. I read over, September 11th happened, and you put out a tribute every year to your friends who lost their lives. And that.
David and Lynn Angel. Yeah.
Yeah.
9/11,
and
yeah. That's
got to be the brutality of all of that, first of all. But even as a creative, as somebody who has great empathy. I don't think you can be a writer without great empathy. To have to relive that every year and think about that stuff every year and just to be in the moment of that. I just wanted to say that, I saw that and my heart goes to you for that. Absolutely.
No, thanks. Yeah. That was so weird because that morning when that happened and I saw where one of the planes was headed to Los Angeles. I said to my wife, I bet we're going to find out that either we know somebody or it's somebody related to somebody we know, that there'll be just somebody that we will know. And then the first names that they announced were David and Lynn Angel, who we knew and were very close to. So, yeah. And we've been back to see the memorial and, see their names on it.
I
Very
tried to go to
impressive
that.
memorial. If you go to New York, if you go to the East Coast, go see that in New York and go see the Vietnam, thing in Washington, D.C. That tribute is pretty amazing too.
It's a lot of emotion. When I tried, because I've been to New York so many times, I keep trying to go to the memorial, and I start freaking out a couple blocks away. It's just, I went to I was in Hawaii, and I went to the Pearl Harbor Museum, and I don't know what it is about this stuff. It gets me so much. I ended up in a hysterical crying, calling my dad, just like, how do humans do this to each other? It's so surreal to me that all this time has gone by, the centuries go by, thousands of years go by, and we still have learned nothing. It makes me crazy.
Yeah. Well, when you have people who choose to get sick and die rather than take a vaccine for political reasons, you go, well,
yeah,
stupidity is not extinct.
Yeah, or ignorance, or the tribalism, or any of that stuff. I mean, there's so many layers as to what makes a person do that kind of stuff. It's bonkers. By the way, you were mentioning the announcing for baseball. So Baltimore Orioles, which I had the vice president of the team on the show in my first year, but Seattle Mariners. I grew up in Seattle.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right. How old are you?
I'm old.
So whether or not you actually heard me calling Mariner games.
I don't know. I was wondering that. When were you there? What years?
I was there from 92, 3, and 4. And then I came back and was there 10 and 11, 2010 and 11.
But before, I've kept you for quite a long time here, but
we're going to edit this down to 11 minutes.
That's right. I'm going to take out all this garbage. You're the worst guest I've had, frankly. I don't.
Just so you know, we've been talking for 7.5 hours, and this is all that she's been able to keep.
That's right. I whittled it down. Playwriting. When did you pivot into that? What made you decide? I mean, I suppose you could call every episode of a television show a mini play, considering.
Well, certainly shows like Cheers and Fraiser that were shot in front of a studio audience. I loved hearing the audience laughter. Mm-hmm. From the time I was a kid and read the book Act One by Moss Hart, I was intrigued by playwriting, and Neil Simon was one of my idols. So I always loved comedy plays. 1,000 Clowns by Herb Gardner. And I kind of reached a point where I thought, you know what? I've written a lot for television. I really don't have anything more to prove in television. I want to write for the theater, and I want to be able to write subjects that interest me, and not, okay, what are the networks looking for this year? Okay, we want sophisticated urban shows. We want rural shows. We want workplace comedies. It's like I wanted to write what I wanted to write. And it's been very freeing. And look, the one thing that the playwright has that TV writers and certainly screenwriters don't have is this power. No one can change a word of my play without my permission. And if I'm unhappy with the production and what the director is doing or how it is cast, I can pull the play. I can say, then you can't show it. Sorry. No. That's not so in movies. So I kind of like having that power where I can really protect my work.
Yeah.
And it's been really fun. It's been a fun ride. I've had productions around the world, and I've gotten a number of plays published. It's been a lot of fun. It's certainly more of a hobby because you don't make money as a playwright. You really don't.
Yeah.
That's why you'll see like a lot of promising playwrights in New York. They'll write a few plays, they get their MFAs from Yale or whatever. And when they're 27, 28, it's like, come out to LA and write CSI Pittsburgh because there's money there.
Right. Right. Yeah. I mean, same with songwriting. It's the creative arts, unfortunately, are losing the battle for the creative.
No, I know. I mean, novelists, I know, and playwrights, I know, successful are teaching. They have a day job. Now, if you're Janet Ivanovich, then yeah, you make millions and you can have your own plane. But for most writers, same thing, playwright. If you're Tony Kushner, you make a lot of money. But if you're, just a normal person, you may get your license fees and stuff, but you're not nearly going to make the kind of money that you can make in television.
Yeah. It's a strange world we live in. I get frustrated by that too, that everybody wants to consume beauty, but nobody wants to pay for it.
Especially now with the internet.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, all that great porn that you used to have to pay for. Now it's just out there. It's free.
I know, it's crazy. Finally, my foot/toe jam fetish can be realized.
Finally, there's probably 17 websites.
Yeah, I know. It's a fun roulette to go onto Pornhub and type in just whatever occurs to you and see if there's a porn for it. And there's a porn
Generally,
for that.
There is. Yeah.
Yeah. There's a porn for that is the name of my memoir.
Eyebrow fetish.
There you go. Oh, I'd be good at that. I've got a lot of eyebrow. Yeah, for sure. Dead caterpillar.
Wow, her eyebrows are so hot. Yeah.
I love the sound they make when you rub them quickly.
Yeah. Thumb fetish.
Yep. It's that's been around since, the old pie days.
Since the beginning of thumbs. Yeah.
That's right. Since hitchhikers were invented.
Since the first opposable thumb, there was a fetish.
Tell people how they might find you out in the world.
You can find my podcast on Apple and most places that have podcasts. It's on iHeart and TuneIn and Spotify and all those other places. Or you can go to the website. It's called Hollywood and Levine. You can find my blog, which is called bykenlevine.com. Just go to Google and go Ken Levine blog, and it'll take you to it. And I'm on Twitter at Ken Levine, also on Instagram, Hollywood and Levine.
Perfect.
And that's how you can get me. And if you want to license my plays, there's a website called kenlevineplays.com. And you can go there. You can read samples of my plays and whatever. Or you can come to my house. I'm at my house usually a lot.
Don't say
Especially
that.
The last year and a half, I was at my house all the time.
Yeah. So people can send their amateur thumb porn to you.
Oh, yeah. Oh, man. Some of the stuff you're just going like, who are these people?
The Hitchhiker's Guide to Ecstasy. There we go. I like that idea. Who are these people? These are creatives. These are go-getters. These are, people who aren't afraid to take risks.
What, the people who have eyebrow fetishes?
Yes.
No, they're the people. Well, they're the people that used to think, "Oh my God, I'm the only person in the world with an eyebrow fetish,"
and they're not.
And then it turns out that there's 12.
Yeah, there was that TV show for a while about my curious fetish or whatever it was called, and there were people that a guy married to his car, or people that were sexually aroused by balloons.
Okay, now that makes sense.
It's all fascinating.
Okay, now that makes sense.
But a balloon
the other stuff is really weird, but balloons are really hot.
The squeaky noise they make when you rub them together, and the fact that they can stick to the ceiling or make your hair stand up. All that.
God, I got to take a cold shower. I'm getting way too excited. Light a cigarette, but I pop the balloon.
I know you've got through so many girlfriends that way.
I know.
Ken, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Thank you for listening, everybody. Bye.
Okay.
Right, bye.
Talk to you later. Bye.
Rate and review Hey Human on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks. Bye.